All right, it looks like we're live, so we'll go ahead and give a couple minutes for people to join in. Thanks for being here today, Pam.
Thanks for having me, Bree.
Very excited. So you were just telling us a little bit about that poster behind you. Do you want to share that with everyone else?
Oh, it's a poster of the 75th anniversary of Atwood Stadium and all the famous events that happened at Atwood Stadium over the years, from Martin Luther King speaking to the Rolling Stones. And one of the pictures has my husband when he played football for Flint Central, except you can't really recognize him because he's at the bottom of the mud pile. It was called the Mud Bowl because it rained so hard. It was the annual Thanksgiving Day. So Jim Abbott's in it. So yeah, some cool mementos from the Atwood Stadium.
Jim's playing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started. Again, thank you so much for joining me today, and you guys online, thank you for joining. My name is Bree Mosher, and I'm the Business Training Manager with the Flint and Genesee Chamber of Commerce. Today, we have with us Pam Murdoch. Before we begin, I do want to just give a heads up that this will be recorded and posted on our website afterwards. Feel free to leave comments and questions in the chat during any time, and we'll make sure that those are addressed. I was just telling Pam and Stephen before we started, this is the 7th week that we've been doing the Support Flint and Genesee webinar series. So that's been really great. A great way for us to provide you guys the need to know updates, anything related to COVID-19, but also a great way for us to share information with you that will help you with continued success after all of this, which this section is going to be great for. So we've been talking a lot about economy reopening and what that's going to look like when all is said and done. And one thing that keeps sticking out in my mind is really the need for human capital. And this is a great time while everyone's working potentially remotely to look at the way that you're engaging with your team and kind of reevaluate some things. Are the strategies that you're using working? What do you want to change going forward? And how should you be checking in? So today's session is going to be great for that. So Pam, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Bree. I'm Pam Murdoch, and I former HR director for quite a few years. And one of the great tools that I used over the course of my career was stay interviews. So I'm going to get started with the presentation and with the objectives to post any questions you might have while the webinar is going on. Bree and Stephen Elkins are going to be monitoring the YouTube and the Facebook, so we'll be able to address those as we go, and we'll also leave some time for questions at the end. So if you want to go to the next slide with the objectives, what I hope to do today is help you understand what a stay interview is if you're not familiar with it, and understand the benefits of it. Also, to be able to effectively conduct a structured stay interview and why it's important that it's structured, and understand how to use the information that you've gained from these stay interviews to increase your retention, and engagement. So if you go to the next slide, right now, I think everybody will agree that, prior to COVID hitting us, talent wars were raging. Retention's always going to be in the spotlight, and regardless if it's COVID or something else, your best people are always going to have other choices. And the exit interview is actually the worst time to find out you could have done something about it, especially when it's a good employee. Your employees may stay with you physically, but not be mentally there. There's always going to be people that are going to be moving, and some that'll be staying that you might wish that they move. So, I just ask you to think, what percentage do you think are leaving their job in your company? Companies are still hiring. I know of quite a few companies that are taking this opportunity to actually recruit good people. The economy is going to pick up eventually, and some companies are already taking advantage, as I said, during this pandemic to recruit top talent. So I thought I'd start with a short story on the next slide. I want you to imagine the scene. You've got a highly productive key employee. They stop by your office and they want to have a word with you. And their demeanor is uncharacteristically sheepish, kind of tentative. You get a feeling something's up when he closes the door, and you know what's coming. Your stomach just is the pit of your stomach. A valued employee is about to resign. We've all had that happen, I think, whether you work in HR or a manager, and you're really disappointed, dismayed. You ask them why. Was it a recent management decision? A problem with the coworker? Was it money? Maybe you've frozen raises. But the employee diplomatically replies that the new job is an opportunity that he couldn't turn down. You could hardly blame him. He's leaving and he has nothing to gain by telling you the truth. I think many of us have been taught to not burn bridges, but quickly your dismay turns to disbelief. Not only was this person a high performer, they were a gregarious personality, they energized their teammates, and their departure is going to affect others, their performance and morale. And what's more, it might reflect poorly on you. How could it happen? There was no signs he was preparing to leave, or were they? Or were there signs? So that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And on the next slide, I wanted to just show you or share with you, what is a stay interview? If you haven't heard of it, it's informal but structured conversation that a manager holds with their high-performing key employees. You want to find out what motivates them to stay with your company, as well as what might entice them to work someplace else. Implementing a stay interview strategy can help you understand what it takes to address turnover with your best people. It can also help the leader understand what it may take to strengthen and maintain their engagement and retention, which we know is key to a person's longevity with a company. I think it's also a really effective tool to use with new hires. I'm going to share with you some data later about the shocking statistics for me, although maybe not so shocking, about people who get hired and the amount of people that quit within 6 months. So you can also use a form of the stay interview with your new hires as well. So if we want to go to the next slide, one of the tools I think almost every company uses is exit interviews. I mean, it provides valuable information, and I'm not suggesting that we not use them. But, once a person has crossed that bridge, they've probably given a lot of thought on why they want to leave, and it's usually too late to save them. In fact, in my experience, even when maybe we've counter-offered, many times those people still leave some months down the road because they've really gone through a thought process. Employees are really, as I mentioned earlier, hesitant to be totally transparent and reveal their true motives. And key resignations, let's face it, they're difficult to replace, and they impact other parts of the organization. And it's always costly in many ways to maybe customer retention and other parts of your organization. So I'd like to ask you to consider a stay interview, which is a complementary tool. It's an opportunity for you to have early intervention before your employee disengages. And it can really increase the retention and engagement of the employee, which we'll go into later why that is. It often provides opportunities and information that can positively impact the whole organization. And the thing that your finance people will love is low cost. Really, it requires no budget, just your time. And it's really effective in building trust with your manager. And it gives you actionable things, real-time information that a manager can address. So you want to ultimately improve your employees' experience. So those are the main differences between them. They both have a place in the organization, but stay interviews are more proactive. So on the next slide, I'm sure this is pretty apparent to you who have lost a top performer. I mean, it can mean a drop in performance. Maybe they're working on a key project. There's a drain on the manager's time to recruit, hire, and train. And there's costs, whether it be recruiting costs, traveling the candidate in, and oftentimes it causes additional stress because the workload's not going away, so that might get spread against or across existing employees, maybe even the manager. And there might be that possible domino effect on morale and other top performers leaving. Usually when a person is leaving, others start thinking, well, gosh, do they know something that I don't? And maybe I should start thinking about that. And then there's also the impact on key customer relationships. Let's say it's your top salesperson and they've just had great relationships with maybe even a number of customers. That can be very damaging to an organization. So, one of the things also when I spoke about new hires leaving, it is happening at an alarming rate. Some of you may have heard of Bamboo HR. They're a form of HRIS system, and they studied 1,000 people and found out 16% could leave in their first week, first month, 16%, second month, 17%, third month, 17%. So see, you could have a real opportunity to impact people. I actually had an employee leave. It was somebody that I didn't want to leave in the HR organization. And she actually, called back after a week and said, I made a mistake. Could I come back? And I was happy to welcome her back, but I was really curious why she wanted to leave, because all the reasons she told me and why she was so excited. Well, first of all, the first couple of days, her manager didn't even talk to her. She was sat in a room with a bunch of orientation materials, and she asked the HR person, when was she going to meet with the boss, and found out she was on vacation and wouldn't be back till the next week. So immediately left a bad taste in her mouth. So new hires will often leave. Maybe they changed their mind on the work type, or it's different work than they expected. Another family member actually went to an opportunity, and they did so because there was 2 opportunities. They were pretty close, but one paid more. But when she got that opportunity, she found out that she was bored. She was actually asking for more work. So a critical time is also your new hires. And for millennials, work is really relationship based. So very critical time. If we want to go to the next slide, please. Excuse me. And this is kind of a rhetorical question, because I'm sure you do know what your employee turnover cost is, but many times we'll get into a debate with our finance person about what that actual cost is, because they said, hey, you're already working 40 hours. But I think the point you want to get across, what is the cost about the things that you're not doing? And when we introduced stay interviews in an organization, it's pretty common that a manager will tell you, I really don't have time for this. I'm too busy. But ask that manager, will they have time to interview, select, orient, and train the person's replacement? That often switches their point of view. So if you want to go to our next slide, I just included this, and I'm sure you probably thought of other things, but 13 signs that somebody's about to quit. If we really pay attention to these, and this is something that we shared with our managers to get them in the mindset about things they need to consider. Has the work productivity gone down? Are they acting less like a team player? Maybe they seem to be doing the minimum work and they were somebody who used to volunteer for extra work. Maybe they're not responding to your request, or maybe their attitude seems a bit negative. So one of the things that we tried to do when we were rolling this out was orient our supervisors, go through your key performers and think about, have you seen some of these signs? Now's the time for that early intervention. So I think it's important to just consider these things, and then it will make your managers perhaps a little bit more interested if you roll out a stay interview strategy. So if you go to the next slide, when should you conduct stay interviews? And some people might say, well, I don't know if now's a good time because we have most of our workforce working at home and they're remote. And I will tell you that I've always done these live, but there's also an option to do them video. But I think it's important to do them annually for the key people. Think about all the employees that you couldn't stand to lose. Maybe they're a key technical person. Who are those key people that you would really not be very happy if they left? And then especially as HR teams are doing succession planning with their managers, do you even have somebody that could step in behind them? That's somebody who's a potential threat. Look at doing new hires at appropriate interval. Maybe it's 30 days for your organization. If you look at your turnover data, look at when it typically occurs. Hilton Hotels looked at their call centers and decided that they really needed to do them very early. And they had I'll share a story later about the impact that had on turning around their new hire turnover. And after an engagement survey could be a great time to roll out the stay interview strategy. Engagement surveys are great, but they usually have a delay in providing information to the organization, sometimes up to 6 months, and a lot of times they're general. The thing about stay interviews is that it's really individual for that person. After a reduction in force, people are nervous. So it may be a great time, and many companies, unfortunately, are having to furlough people perhaps permanently. So the rest of the people that are staying are nervous. So look at your key employees. Are there somebody that you would need to have this conversation? And just as needed. So if you see some of those signs of somebody about to quit, you could always do one. I wanted to really emphasize that stay interviews need to be separate from performance evaluations. I would recommend that they be maybe a 6-month time gap between the two. You really want these to be separate. We want to go to the next slide. So here are some of the common concerns that we've heard from managers and from the research that I've done about why they may or may not want to do a stay interview. Well, what if they ask about money and benefits? That really makes managers nervous. And we know probably the state of business right now. Most companies aren't maybe going to be giving raises. Some companies have done temporary pay reductions. This conversation is not meant to talk about money and benefits. And it's not to say that somebody might not bring it up. And an example of that might be, let's say you had a stay interview, and one of the first things that the employee brings up is, I need a 20% raise. And how would you respond to that? Well, you could respond that you're worth that and more, but I'd love to say yes, but be honest. Maybe the state of the business doesn't allow it. Let them know that you're hearing their request, and when the time is right, you will be able to maybe put that forward. But in the meantime, really what you want to focus on is, what are you hoping for? What's important to you at work? I want to make it a better work experience. Another concern that's common that comes up, what if their ideas cost money and you don't have a budget? Again, be honest, but perhaps brainstorm with the employee. What could we do to meet that need? Let's say they bring up training. Well, there's a lot of free trainings available. Maybe it's a job shadowing. Brainstorm with the employee to come up with an idea. So again, we mentioned, what if I don't have time for the discussions? Well, do they have time to go out and spend time, recruiting, hiring, interviews, and the cost of it? And then there's the question that's pretty common is, what if I've never had these types of conversations and they question my motivation? I'm not that kind of warm and fuzzy person, and I think they're going to really question me. Well, just again, be honest. One situation, the employee asked his boss, "Did you read a book or something, or did HR tell you to do this?" be honest about it. HR did bring this up to me, or I have been looking into how I can make a better experience for my employees. So I just learned about this tool, and I'd like invite you to help me gain some information about what I can do. So I think, and I'll go through it a little bit later, but brainstorming with your managers is going to be really key to being successful. Some managers have even said, what if the problem is me? What if they don't trust me to be open and honest? Well, I think I would suggest that they get some help for that, because that's probably something that's going to happen with everybody in their group. So those are just some of the common concerns that come up. So if we go to the next slide. People are so busy right now, they might say, well, I don't really have time for this. But really, the time commit for stay interviews is minimal compared to recruiting, interviewing, and training a replacement. You should be able to complete the stay interview process in approximately 2 hours. Half an hour for preparation, no more than 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes for the actual interview, and then review and evaluate what you find from the interview, because employees will probably have some questions that maybe you can't on the spot respond to. So maybe you need to reach out to your boss or to HR. And then the follow-up. Follow-up is absolutely critical. I can't emphasize that enough. Then if you go to the next slide, I want to just highlight a few of the best practices to prepare your managers. And at the end of the presentation, I've hopefully given you enough references that are pretty detailed that can lay this out for you. There's even an ebook that only costs $3.99. I know everybody's all about saving money these days and the budgets are tight. But I think it's really important, unless your managers are pretty evolved and are very comfortable talking with their employees, to have a brief training session. Maybe include role plays. Ask them what concerns they might come up with. Help them come up with ways to address it. Even go as far as to provide them with the phraseology on how they can respond. Because let's face it, not all managers are comfortable with this type of thing. And in the references is a sample toolkit that you could provide them with, which I think is really helpful. We rolled this out with an engineering organization. The engagement survey came back with lots of red flags. It also was an area that was really hard to recruit. It wasn't a particularly great geographic area. There wasn't a lot of things for young people to do. So we used these stay interviews, and the managers were really nervous. So the sample toolkit can really help them. Some companies even put together a little committee and have the managers jointly come up with this toolkit. It depends on your organization and the time and whether or not you think they could dedicate it to participating in a committee. So I think it's really helpful to have a sample script. How do I even start the conversation? How do I extend the invite? I mean, it's uncomfortable for people. Like, how do I even start? And it could be just as simple as, hey, I'd like to talk to you about the reasons you stay with us, so I understand how I can, make this a great place for you to work. Would you be willing to help me out? It could be as simple as that. Whatever words are comfortable for your managers and leaders, help them extend the invite. I think setting the stage is really important. And then help them on how to begin the interview. How do you set the tone? I would also provide them with sample questions, and maybe they want to come up with those sample questions. Examples of how to respond to the concerns that are common, and how to use open ended questions as well as probing questions. And then the importance of not only summarizing and closing the discussion. And then a few more best practices on the next page. What are those common potential concerns and responses, as I had mentioned? And then even coming up with a stay plan form to document the discussion. You do want it to be a casual and kind of informal discussion, but you also want to capture the discussion. And I think a form is a good way to do that. It could be a really simple form. You don't want to make this a really laborious process, but just so the manager can capture the discussion. I would also recommend start with a small group of your key long-term employees to have the discussion. People that you feel are pretty loyal. Let them know that, we're going to be rolling this out with, and we'd like to have your input. It's going to make your employees feel like you care enough to hear what they think, makes them feel special, and then share the lessons learned from the first discussions with your managers. Nothing like hearing it from a peer instead of perhaps HR. It's not something that just HR is pushing, but that a peer is really selling. That can really help you when you're trying to gain some momentum in your organization. So on the next slide, as I mentioned, just very simple. You're invited to attend a discussion in your continued development. Use this as an opportunity to praise them. I mean, you make a difference. I value your contributions, and I want to discuss some things that are important to both you and me. What's going to keep you here? What might entice you away? And what's energizing about your work? Are we fully utilizing your talents? That should be what is inhibiting your success instead of exhibiting. Sorry for the typo. And what can I do differently to best assist you? Sometimes people are afraid to ask some of those questions because it might feel like you're opening up Pandora's box, like what might entice you away. But you'd be surprised that can give you some great clues about how you can co-create a great experience for your employee. So if you want to go to the next slide. And make sure you inform your employee the purpose of the stay interviews. There's a lot of schools of thought. Some people say you should just make it casual and not even make a formal invite. But for somebody that's an extrovert, that might be really comfortable because they think and will be able to respond off the top of their head. But if somebody is an introvert, they're really probably going to want to have some more background and give some chance to prepare for it. Make sure you're approaching it with an open mind. This is all about positive change. You are definitely going to hear some things that you may not want to hear, but the whole purpose of it is that early intervention. And take a few minutes just to reflect on your knowledge of the individual employee. What do you already know about them? And anticipate concerns they might have. And I'd also select a limited number of questions. I think managers like a choice, so maybe you would give them a menu of what those questions might be, but I think it's really important to at least give them some choices. So if we want to go to the next slide, let's get into the actual interview. Now I know most of us are not at work yet, but you may want to wait to do this when you're back at work. But, I'd meet in a private location, maybe even consider sitting on the same side of the table. Make it informal. When it's not practical, I would use a video tool because I think it's going to be important to be able to read your employee's body language and for them to see you and express open body language. If you get really defensive, that's really going to set a wrong tone for the interview. Again, remind them what the purpose of the interview is. I want to co-create a great experience for you. And I want to just ask you a few questions that can help me understand. And you will be really surprised if you do these. And maybe your manager has worked with somebody for years. The managers came back and said, gosh, I never knew this about my employee. It was really remarkable, the number of managers that came back and said that. Really important to ask open-ended questions. For instance, you don't want to ask them, do you like working here? You're going to get a yes or no, and probably with the state of business, they're probably just going to answer yes, even if they feel that it's no. But asking them an open-ended question about what do you like most about working here? What do you like least about working here is going to give you a lot more information. Making sure that you're taking short notes if needed, and just trying to gather as much information about why does the employee stay? What are their concerns? What are their requests? Be sure at the end to summarize the discussion and thank the employee, and then let the employee know when you will have follow-up. If you're not going to follow up, I beg you, and I really beg you, don't even bother doing stay interviews, because you will do more damage than if you actually had it, if there's no follow-up. So I can't emphasize that enough. If we go to the next slide, take some time to evaluate. Look at your notes. What did they tell you about why they stay? And how can you maintain that? Really consider all requests, even if they seem like something that you can't honor. Why is it important to the employee? Is it going to cost to implement? Is there another way that you can do it in a low cost way? And how will it affect other employees? Maybe they're asking you something that's against the policy. Is it going to improve how they contribute to the team? And again, does it fit with your department and company policy? So if you're not able to fill the request, ask yourself, what is your reason for denying it? And what's the underlying concern that maybe led them to make that? And identify solutions and alternatives when you go back, and maybe even do that jointly with the employee that can't be granted, and then document that stay plan. If we go to the next slide, follow up. Review the stay plan, maybe with your boss or HR. Maybe you're not sure if you can grant some of the things. Check back with the employee, review with them. Hey, this is what we talked about. This is what I'm able to do, and let's move forward. And then you can repeat it annually or as needed. But again, untimely or lack of follow-up is going to do more damage if you never held the stay interview. That's absolutely critical. If you can't get that commitment from your managers, I wouldn't do it. So if we want to go to the next slide. So I provided some sample stay questions, and you're wanting to get at, what are the positive stay factors? What would entice them to leave? What's important to them? So kind of look at them in those categories. And these are just some sample questions. There are literally, the references I've given you, there are literally probably hundreds and hundreds of questions. They are questions that you're going to want to have your managers buy into. So maybe you let them pick them, but you want to just have a handful, because really this only needs to last like a 20 or 30-minute discussion. The fourth question, if one thing that was changed in your role, what would make you consider moving on? Maybe ask them, what is your dream job? So you can get out, what is it that they're looking for? On the next page, there's a few more questions. If you had to go back to a position in your past and stay for an extended period of time, which one would it be and why? What do you need to learn to work at your best? What makes a great day at work? Sometimes it's their coworkers. That's going to impact on them staying. What can we do to make your job more satisfying? And I think you should be brave enough. Looks like I have another small typo there. Apologies for that. Another question I think you should be brave enough to ask is, what could I do differently as your boss? There's one thing I could do differently, do more of, do less of. What would that be? If you were supervising you, what would you do differently? You'd be surprised at the number of things that come out of these conversations. It's pretty amazing. Managers have come back and said, I just never thought I would get these kind of answers. And they wouldn't have had these kind of discussions without this type of structure. So if we go on to the next slide. This is a question that comes up. There's a couple schools of thoughts out there. My personal opinion is if HR should ever conduct it, I would really only recommend it in special circumstances, maybe where you do have a difficult manager and you need to get a pulse on things. But the overall point of the stay interview is really to strengthen the employee and manager relationship. Perhaps for your new hires, it might be better for HR to do it. Maybe it's only a 15-minute, a few questions, because it can give you a heads up if there is an issue going on and you can help coach the manager. There was a Gallup study that interviewed over 12 million employees, 7,000 companies, found that the relationship with your manager largely determines the length of the employee's stay. And for those of you that do exit interviews, I'm sure you found that wouldn't surprise you at all. And if you've ever changed jobs, that relationship with your manager is very important. And especially, I think, for millennials these days, they're a lot more attuned to the relationships and the human part of their job. That's important to them. So going on to the next slide. How are you going to use the information? I think you need to make sure that you're sharing with your managers, because a lot of times information that's found out in general, you can come up with a few themes that can help other managers. You really want to focus on retaining key employees. I do know organizations that have done it with all their employees. I think that can be pretty time consuming. I don't think that most organizations would have time for it. I will tell you that sometimes doing the stay interviews can cause an issue where an employee might share with someone that, hey, I had this great conversation with my boss, and the employee says, well, gosh, they never asked me. So you are going to have to consider that. Sometimes people have said, and I've done this before, I just want to have a confidential one-on-one conversation with you. So you can't prevent those type of things, but it is something that you probably need to be aware of. I think it's really good to supplement employee engagement surveys and the exit interview metrics. It can really help you with your overall culture. And then it just increases your overall engagement initiatives that you're doing. A lot of retention and engagement initiatives take time. They are things that are done for the general population. The stay interview is really a personal one-on-one interview with that key employee or that new hire. So if you want to go to the next slide. Some success stories. Some are from experiences I've had. Some are from the book, Love 'Em or Lose 'Em. It's one of my favorite books that I've used in the course of my career. They're on their 5th edition. I think it's really practical. We actually used it with the engineering organization that I mentioned, and it's one of those, they have A through Z, and it's 26 different ideas that are related to stay interviews and retention and engagement that actually complement stay interviews. So it was a great tool. It's kind of a fun, casual book, but some really great ideas. And they have a lot of data in there. But one of the stories that they shared was you had a very long-term 23-year employee, and they had decided, I'm really not learning anything. They had their resume ready. That stay interview, along with the follow-up, saved that person from resigning. They heard that they wanted a new challenge. There was a project that they had not been assigned to that they were interested in. So many good things come out of the stay interview. And then I shared with you about the high turnover that we had in the engineering organization. We had a really strong turnover reduction. It went down 20%. I just checked in with their HR team, and they're still using stay interviews to this day. And that was 15 years ago. It's really strengthened their culture and their retention. And then you might have a high performing employee who seems pretty stressed. That's one of those job signs. So you reach out to the employee to find out what's going on, maybe not mentioning the stress, but approaching it from that, hey, you're really valuable to us. Like to know what's going on, how we can make your work more enjoyable, and like to ask you a few questions. They seemed stressed because they were getting ready to be promoted and they really didn't want a promotion. That happens a lot, especially in technical organizations or really any type of job where the person's good at it, so they deem that they're going to be a good manager, and maybe they don't want that promotion. Maybe you just need them to be that key employee that does what they like to do. International hotel chain. This is actually Hilton, but they were averaging 55% turnover, and 50% of those employees failed to reach 90 days. And call centers have a high turnover anyhow, but using stay interviews, implementing at 30 days, reduced their turnover 50% in 4 months. What manager wouldn't love that kind of result? So next slide. So just in summary, the Saratoga Institute, and I think they've since been bought by PwC, one of the big consulting firms. They looked at over 20,000 employees, and 75% of the employees left for a reason which their supervisors actually had influence over. I don't think anybody will debate that retention is easier and more cost-effective than recruiting. Stay interviews are really meant to strengthen that relationship between the manager and ultimately should make the employee more satisfied and make the manager's job easier when they know what motivates the employee. So I'm going to see if we have any questions. I don't know, Bree and Stephen, if we have any questions. We could have some discussion at this point.
We don't have any questions yet, but now's a perfect time to add them into the comments. If you do, I have a couple of thoughts that can help open up that dialogue while we wait. So one of the points that you made, was that you're not really sure if now is the time to conduct these stay interviews. I was speaking to someone. We got a visitor. Come in or stay out. I was speaking to someone the other day who, has been with their organization for quite a while, and all of this happening and actually being laid off is making them really think about, do they want to make a job change or not? It's not a thought that they had before all of this happened. So what are your thoughts on that, this situation affecting employees now that they are at home and they have that time to think about, is this what they really want, or is it time to make a change?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect time to probably intervene and maybe have that discussion, even if it's by video. It may not be as ideal, but I think that'll let the employee know that you care. I think just to recognize that, hey, I know you might be nervous with everything that's going on. I want to reassure you that you're a valuable contributor and somebody that we really would love to keep with the organization. So, I'd just like to ask you a few questions because some things will be changing with the organization. So you and I can maybe co-create a good experience for you going forward. I know there's an extra workload. Just acknowledge and recognize their discomfort. I think it's a great time to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing I had was that the questions that you provided, the sample questions for the state interviews, I also thought that those might be great journaling prompts for employees themselves. So you mentioned that this would be, a manager or supervisor having this conversation. But one of the things that we talk about in our leadership program that you're involved in is the need for personal accountability in your growth and development. So I think that, and I want to hear your thoughts on using these as journaling prompts to kind of help you think about it yourself and actually bring that discussion to your manager or your supervisor if maybe they're not initiating it with you.
I think that's a great idea because, oftentimes as employees, we don't really stop and reflect. I can remember in my career that I was a little frustrated. There was a promotion that I was interested in and went and talked to somebody who I felt could be a mentor. And, that person actually suggested some of those things. What are you doing to own the process? This isn't just your boss's process. What are the things that you're considering doing for your development? You need to play a part in that as well. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. So we have one comment come through where it says, I hope that more companies start implementing state interviews. It could really help the company culture and help employees feel valued. So we spoke a lot about, on the management end, do they have the time and the money to recruit, train, hire, all of that? But from the employees end, there's a huge ROI potential there as well, and making them feel more valued and really encouraging them to stay.
Absolutely. And, again, like I had mentioned, and I think that most HR people and even managers would agree, once they go through that thought process about leaving, it's almost too late. But there are many times when you can intervene and just even ask your managers as some prompts. Think about every employee that you would hate to lose tomorrow. If you don't have 30 minutes to talk to them, are you going to be able to afford the time to, recruit and train somebody? It changes their mindset. And I'll tell you, managers really are nervous about having this conversation. It's like, why would we be nervous to talk to our employees? Well, managers say, well, we're getting into feelings, or what if I can't answer? So the more we can do to support them. In the references that I've listed, the state of California has some really great references where they had two different places, San Bernardino County and Los Angeles. One was a subcommittee, and I don't know who led the other one, but really detailed information. There's also 3 people that I really think are experts in stay interviews, and it's Beverly Kay and Sharon Jordan Evans, the Love 'Em or Lose 'Em book. It is so easy to use. Dr. John Sullivan, I listed on there, has an ebook. It's only $3.99. It kind of walks you through the process that I just talked about. And then also Finnegan, I can't recall his first name, but I've listed him on the references too. Now gets a little bit more into the analytical, but companies as small as, I noticed in one of the references that there was even a nursing home center used it in Michigan, to the Marriott, to Ingersoll Rand, big companies. It doesn't matter what the size of companies. It's so easy to implement once you can get your managers comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. And then I also jotted down a note. I think that this idea can easily be adapted for our account managers or maybe sales employees who I saw were on the call. So maybe you don't manage a team, but you have a couple of key accounts. Maybe think about how you could adapt those questions to have an open conversation with your customers. So some of the ones that I jotted down were, what do you like about working with us? What can I do best to assist you? What might entice you to go away? So oftentimes in a sales role, once we have that account, we don't always put the intention behind maybe how do we keep them on. And the note that I jotted down was, what is the cost to prospect, build a relationship, kind of like adapting what you're talking about from a leadership standpoint, but into a different way that people might use this practice.
I love that application, Bree, because you're right. When you lose a customer, it's heartbreaking. And if you could have these similar type conversations, especially now when maybe there's a little bit more time to talk, it could really, again, show your customer that you care.
Yeah.
Because once they've left you, it's very hard to get them back. And it takes a lot of time to get a customer. Yeah. Love that application.
And then another note I jotted down, you shared the signs that someone is going to quit. But then earlier on in the presentation, you also shared that something we might find out during the exit interview is that they're quitting and we had no idea. So just because someone is exhibiting those signs doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't prompt a state interview if we're not seeing those, correct?
Right, absolutely. It's just it is another time that you may want to consider because you are seeing those signs, and maybe some organizations use the stay interviews like biannually. But if you're seeing that, it's a great opportunity to do a check-in.
Right. So we got a couple of comments coming up. Brenda, did we see the references page yet? Stephen, if you could please pop that up there, that'd be great. And then Tara, can we have access to the reference page and possibly some of the sample questions? So what we're going to do following this presentation a little later today, we'll upload the recording to our website, and then I'll make sure that we also upload a couple of those document references. And Tara and Brenda, I will reach out to you individually to make sure that we get those to you as well. Brenda is also asking if it's possible to connect with Pam for follow-up. So I'll connect the two of you after this presentation as well.
Yeah. And Stephen, if you would go back one page, the first two, the Department of Human Resources in LA and the San Bernardino, have really detailed, they're on the public domain. So I'm sure that, you could adapt it. If you were going to get one book and could spend, I think it's like $18, I'd probably do the Love 'Em or Lose Them, Getting Good People to Stay. I'd make sure I'd get the 5th edition. They have continued. Stay interviews have been around for about 20 years, but unfortunately, a lot of organizations haven't embraced it. But a lot of what you see in best company, Fortune 100, best places to work, or local best places to work do, and they absolutely do adapt it. On the next reference, and also if you remember, I know we have more than HR people, but Society for Human Resources has some information on there. On the next reference page, the Dr. John Sullivan, that was that ebook that's only $3.99 if your budget's tight. And then also that last book, The Power of Stay Interviews, is Richard Finnegan. His was actually published by the Society of Human Resources. They all have similar layouts, but they're all great resources for helping you roll out a stay interview strategy. And hopefully, like between the ebook and the free California resources, you could do it with little to no cost. And I'm always happy to help anyone if they have any questions afterwards, and we can share the slides. I'd like to make correction on a few of my little typos before I send it out, but we can absolutely share the presentation. Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us today. I think it was very beneficial for all of those who joined on and anyone who will watch the recording afterwards. I think, like I said earlier, now is the perfect time to really take a look at how you're engaging with your staff, and whether you start to conduct these now while we're working remotely or not, it's a great time to put a plan in place for when we do return back to work with each other.
So thanks for the opportunity, and I hope you will at least take a look at it and have a discussion with your management team. If you do decide to embrace it, I think you will be surprised at the results. I think your managers will be really pleasantly surprised about how it really deepens and strengthens their relationship with their employee, and hopefully head off some key resignations that would be really hurtful to your organization. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yep. So we've got one last comment that came in. Brenda says she's been liking the live webinars. Thank you for hosting them. It is our absolute pleasure. Brenda, thank you so much for joining in. The Support Flint and Genesee webinar series was something that we put together in response to COVID-19, but we provide workshops and trainings all throughout the year, and we're really excited to ramp those back up starting next week. So if you're interested in workshops like these, please visit flintandgenesee.org/training. for a list of all of the workshops that we have coming up between now and the end of June. Within the next 2 months, I think it's just a little over a dozen of workshops and professional development opportunities that we're bringing to you, and we're really excited to continue to provide that resource to our community. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.